All right, good morning, everybody. We'll get started now. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the Committee for Sydney, and welcome to today's Committee for Sydney Live event, The Digital Recovery, How the Smart State Can Beat the Recession, featuring the Honorable Victor Dominello, MP, Minister for Customer Service. To start, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. While we are meeting online today, and you may be somewhere else in Sydney or somewhere else in the world, I am currently on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people who occupied this part of the Sydney coast. As I think most of you will know, Minister Dominello has been a very influential person transforming the state government's approach to digital services. New South Wales is widely viewed as one of the leading governments in the world for digital and customer services. Some of that shows up in very practical ways when people need to interact with government. It shows up in how you get your driver's license, for example. But it extends much further, and we will be hearing about some of that today. The minister has been involved with many other things as well, including the response to COVID. Today, our focus is how new approaches to smart cities and smart government can help unlock a broad recovery. The way this works is the minister will make opening remarks, and then you can submit questions via the Q&A app on Zoom. I will sort through those. I have already received some via email, and we will take it from there. Minister, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Oh, thanks, Gabriel, and thank you for those taking time out of their day to participate in this discussion. If I can just maybe walk you through what I'd like to articulate this morning for the next, say, 10, 15 minutes, and then hopefully have a really robust Q&A following that. So firstly, if you don't mind, I'll just go through a brief history of how we've got to this point in terms of service and then customer service. Second thing, if I can just walk you through quickly on how the government quickly mobilised behind the scenes, give you a behind the scenes look on the government's response to COVID and ongoing response to COVID. Third, what we've actually done in COVID. And then fourthly, what we're doing to set us up for the future, which is obviously the most important thing. That we can have all the dreams in the future, but if we don't deliver now, if we don't show runs on the board now, there's not much confidence in the future. So that's why I want to walk you through the history, the present, and then tomorrow, of course. So let's start with 2011. We formed government in 2011, and that's where we started bringing together Service New South Wales, which at that point, and still is, a world-leading organisation. Like to this day, people around the world are contacting me saying, how did you do it? How can we learn from the lessons of service? Because not many countries around the world have successfully navigated that journey where you truly do put the citizen first or the customer first in the day-to-day transactions. And that's how service was created. We basically got the old roads and maritime service. We changed the culture. That's a whole new topic of conversation. You might want to ask me about culture change. Change the culture. And then in that, we put a new brand on it, smart tech behind, smart EQ at the front, and we had Service New South Wales. Service New South Wales, for the first 4 or 5 years of its life, was pretty much a transactional style organisation, i.e. you come in, we'll transform digital driver's license, but it's still a transactional type arrangement. In the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years, it started evolving into more of a whole of government type approach where it became more of a triage service. So for example, we had a cost of living service. So you come in there, you sit down with the cost of living officer for an hour, and they would then do all the heavy lifting behind the scenes to find out where you could find or save money on various grants, on various rebates, on various initiatives. And service then eked out a new existence beyond the simple, let me get you a transaction faster and digitally. Then what happened was we had the bushfires. So let me go back one more step, sorry. So in 2019, we had another election, and then we created the Ministry for Customer Service, and the Department of Customer Service, which again, to our knowledge, is the first of its kind in the world. Because what we wanted to do in essence is to pick up all the learnings that we had out of service of putting the customer and the citizen first, and then bring that right across government in terms of its culture. So we created a whole new cluster around it, which is, again, one of the first of its kind in the world. And that's been moving along really well. But we had the bushfires intervene. And what we saw in the bushfires is, obviously, you had RFS, Rural Firefighting Service. You had all the frontline people doing their traditional roles. But we saw that as soon as the firefighters did their critical work in the field, the next point of call were when people were then going into service centres saying, I've just lost my license. How do I, because it was burned in the fire. I need financial assistance. How do I go and where do I go for all this assistance? We realised then that service had evolved to another level again, in the sense that it became a frontline service delivery agency, not just the transactional piece at the back. Then COVID came along. All this is happening so fast. And then when COVID came along, when we designed the government's response to COVID, not in a million years would you have contemplated that a Department of Customer Service would be in the epicenter of that response. In fact, when you look at the pandemic plans that were published 4 years ago, Department of Customer Service didn't even exist. But thankfully, the Premier, through her leadership and her vision, said, no, we need Department of Customer Service right there at the epicenter. So, there were 5 core ministers there. There was obviously the Premier, Treasurer, Minister for Health, Deputy Premier, and myself. We were the 5 core ministers in the team that was leading the response to COVID. And we were based at CEOC, the State Emergency Operations Centre at Homebush. And we'd meet there every morning at 7:30 and chart out the days and weeks ahead of us. When the Premier asked me to join the team straight up, she said, Victor, I want you to have a look at the data architecture, to make sure that we have a data-driven response to COVID, because data equals informed decision-making. And if you digitize it, then it can be faster and more accurate. So I had a look and I realised that, as usual, government was broken up into silos. Health was doing excellent work on its silo. Transport had a transport response. Police had its response. But there was no integration of all the data that we needed for a holistic response to COVID. So on day 2, I got together basically the chief data scientists from each agency, brought them together in meetings and they started meeting early every morning. And we built up basically a communal dashboard where all the KPIs of every agency, whether it's health, transport, Department of Customer Service, police, whatever it was, they come together so that every agency could then see the key dashboards of every other agency. So they could say, wow, that's interesting. We're seeing an increase in foot traffic in service centres, i.e. part of our dashboard, and that has a potential direct correlation to something in relation to truancy at school, kids not going to school because their parents are going or abandoning the service centres. Things like that became more and more powerful as the days went on. And that was the first time ever, and I've been in government for 10 years now, almost 10 years, first time ever that we've had a consolidated dashboard. And I could almost guarantee we'd be the first government in the country that would have done it, because we're pretty digitally advanced here in New South Wales. And if we're not doing it, nobody else would have done it. So that was pretty powerful insight. And then, all right, moving on to the next stage, what else did we do? We immediately employed 1,000 extra staff at service so that we could obviously muscle up and respond to people who are in desperate need, whether it's through grants, helplines, et cetera. We created the business grants, digitized that, so we were turning those $10,000 grants and then moved it to $3,000 grants and turned them around really fast. Again, all digital, all online. They were getting the money. We promised within 5 days, but the average, I think, was within about 72 hours. We turned around the border permits. There was a big problem, obviously, down in Victoria. We had to stem the flow there. We turned around the border permits literally in about 72 hours. It was just an incredible response. And again, the only way they could do that is because they had the culture embedded in the team, where they could move from concept to product to implementation really, really quickly. And that was a big collaboration piece with police and health on that. Another interesting thing that we done that was nation leading was New South Wales Health Pathology. They managed to get out a text messaging service so that if you were screened, rather than waiting at home for 14 days and not knowing what the outcome of the result was, we were able to send you a text message to say within 24 hours that you're negative. So again, that takes away a lot of the stress and anxiety, which causes its own problems. And obviously if you're positive, you don't get a text message, you get a phone call. But 80% of people now opted into that text messaging service, and they're getting response within 24 hours, which is just extraordinary. And again, compare that to other places where some people are waiting days, if not weeks, if at all, to get a response back in relation to their test. That was a huge play by health, so congratulations to them on that. We were the first state, and to my knowledge, the only state so far that has required high-risk businesses such as pubs, clubs, hotels, gyms, etc., to register that they are, A, they've got a COVID-safe plan, but B, they're a COVID-safe business, so they've got the blue tick. And now we're evolving that further, and we're definitely the only state to roll out a check-in service. So we'll provide the QR code for these venues, and then the citizen can go up there, get their camera onto the QR code, and then it's pre-populated, you check in. Because we've got to move away from the walk-in culture to the check-in culture, so that if there is an outbreak, we can definitely then help the contact tracers, because they're digital records rather than scrappy bits of paper and scribble on it. And that takes hours, if not days, to try and decipher some of that mess. So if it's digital and if it's linked into your service account, we know it's authentic, i.e. you can't write Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck on it. We know it's you. And more importantly, we've collaborated very closely with the Privacy Commissioner. So because it's a Service New South Wales app, we've been working with privacy by design from the outset. So that means the customers don't need to necessarily sign up to the venue if they don't want, but they can go through service, you still get the attendance, get the privacy, and you don't get the marketing if you don't want it. But then at the point of transaction, then the businesses can say, hey, look, do you want to sign up to our restaurant, whatever it is, like Woolworths cards, you normally do your frequent flyer points and all your points at the point of transaction. But at the point of entry, hopefully we'll build out this check-in service, which is going to be really important. Because the reality is COVID's here for a while to come. Even if we do get drugs that will reduce the severity, even if we do get a vaccine, we're talking at least until this time next year, at least until when things start to try and settle down. So we need to build this compliance culture, and this digital check-in service will help us significantly in that journey. And then finally, if I can talk to the future before throwing it over to Q&A, the future is really exciting. And thankfully, what we saw out of COVID was an acceleration of our journey that we'd already started. So I'd already announced a $1.6 billion digital restart fund. That's the largest digital investment that we've seen in the country, particularly from a state. And that is designed to turbocharge our transformation journey, which we were already moving fast, but we are now definitely turbocharging. Of that $1.6 billion fund, we've already earmarked $240 million to cybersecurity. Again, the largest amount to our knowledge in Australian history, because that's over a 4-year term, as opposed to some other bigger amounts that were spread over 10 years. And again, it's a stake in the ground that we want to be the cyber leaders, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, in the years ahead. And that $240 million investment definitely allows us to do that. But it's not just about building up capacity in terms of cyber, it's about building the industry as well, because that's talking about the future. The jobs of tomorrow have to be around digital and around cyber and around the smarts. And cyber is just going to be like insurance policy. You're just going to have it. So that's why we want to have a big play in that. Another thing we've done is we've just announced our smart cities policy, and that's exciting because it's not just smart cities, it's smart places, i.e. we're not just focusing on the city of Sydney or city of Parramatta or Liverpool, it's smart places. It's a truly regional look at the use of smart across New South Wales. And we're building into that. Well, that goes together with the smart infrastructures policy, which again means that as of Friday last week when I launched it, every infrastructure project that is over $10 million has to have smart technology embedded as part of its design, and everything that's over $5 million in terms of IT equally has to have smart architecture around it. And when you think that we've got over $103 billion in the pipeline in terms of infrastructure over the next 4 years, again, record amount of infrastructure spend, that translates immediately to a record amount of smart spend as well. So it was really good to get this policy in place to set us up for the future. And the same with the IT. We're spending billions each year, and it's important to embed that smart into the architecture. And that is in addition to all the other stuff that we're building out in terms of digital. So I've already spoken about e-planning in previous seminars. We're building on top of e-planning, e-construction, digital twin. We're building out the strata portal. Basically, we're trying to create a e-property. So there's a one-stop shop. So you go to a place, say e-planning, you press a button, then you'll see the entire history of that property. The planning history, who are the builders, who are the engineers, and then in the use code of that building, i.e. The permissions. Are you allowed to have a pool there? Are you allowed to have a business there? Is it a place that's permitted for 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms? Whatever it is, all of this comes into one place, because if we can digitize that planning ecosystem, then we will get far, far better service delivery when it comes to where do we put the schools, where do we put the roads, the hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I was particularly championing the e-planning portal and everything that aligns with that over the last few years. But that's landed really well. So in a nutshell, our future is to make sure that we continue on this path, but in fact accelerate our path towards being a smart state, because we do have a smart people here in New South Wales, and they're entitled to government services that are fit for purpose in the 21st century. And we've had a lot of catching up to do. I think we've only just really got out of first gear, second gear maybe. There's a few more gears in this engine yet, and we're just really starting now that we got the 1.6 billion and we got the Digital Restart Fund. And I'll announce very soon what the Smart Cities Fund will look like, which will be exciting, particularly for this audience. So I could talk forever on this topic, but I might stop there, Gabrielle, if it's okay with you, because I'd actually like to hear some of the feedback from your members, because I'd like to hear what their aspirations, their concerns, so we can have a good discussion around that as well.
Okay,
So
great. Thank you very much, Minister. Let me start by picking up on one of the last things you mentioned, the Smart Places strategy that you launched on Friday. What are some examples of the main things that is going to lead to? I mean, it's a very abstract notion, smart places, smart cities. So tangibly, what are the main types of technologies or systems you imagine coming out of that?
I don't want to straitjacket the ecosystem by framing it up, because, to be honest, I think it's really as wild as your imagination will allow. But let me give you some examples, because typically people think, smart cities, smart places, it's a smart pole, but it's way more than that. It's the way we use data. And I'll give you an example. So I was up at Newcastle City Council. So they're doing a trial at the moment in relation to the lockout laws. And they heard about what we were doing in relation to smart places. And they heard about the Digital Restart Fund. And they said, look, would you mind if we put in a play to get some good data architecture out in relation to the nighttime economy? Because we're trying to open up some small bars up here in Newcastle after the decade-long lockout. And we want to actually architect out to find out exactly the impact of opening up in a safe way, of course, small bars and that ecosystem. So they want to find out, ideally in close to real time as possible, not just how many bars are opening up, but how many new musicians are coming into those bars. How many people are moving from the bars to buying snacks at 7-Eleven afterwards. The entire ecosystem, that requires strong data architecture. Now, if we can then partner with them to get that data architecture in place, then you can pick that up, then take that to Liverpool or Parramatta, et cetera, so we can start measuring in real time the impact on the interventions on opening up in a smart way. So that is a smart place because it's using data as it's designed. So it's not just about putting a sensor on a pole or a black strip across a road or measuring how much garbage is in a bin. That's all important, part of the design. There's also, deeper than that. It's about understanding the power of data, bringing it in, sharing it, opening it up, and then driving really powerful insights upon the impact on interventions. So that's an example of how we need to rethink smart. It's more than gadgets. At its core, it's about information and data.
Okay, interesting. A question came in about cybersecurity. You mentioned the $240 million fund. What are the main types of threats that this is going to be addressing, and how is that going to work?
Oh, well, obviously, I won't go into too much detail, but because there's been enough news around it. But there's obviously an increased cyber posture on an international level in relation to state actors. So I don't think that's going away anytime soon. That's just going to be like COVID, the part of the new reality for a period of time. So we need to make sure that we build up our muscle in relation to that. But increasingly, we're seeing culturally there's been a big shift because of COVID. So, for example, a lot more people are working from home. That means they're taking their offices to home. And we all know that when it comes to cyber, the easiest point of entry is human error. So we're going to have to build up the cultural muscle as well as the technology, because it's not just coming into an office where you can, in a large measure, control the culture and control systems. We need to help build that out into home offices as well. So it's about building both the cultural muscle and the technology muscle in cyber, but equally and just as importantly for me, it's building the industry so that we can definitely lead this part of the world when it comes to cyber moving forward. Because this is an industry that's not going away. This is just going to get stronger and stronger. we need to be a lead in that, and we will be.
Yeah, there's a notion in startup culture about certain places becoming test beds for certain industries. It's hard to achieve because you have to be significantly better than the competition in other places in the world. But sounds like you see an opportunity in cyber.
Oh, well, Gabriel, think about it, Gabriel. Like, a lot of people talk up the big game, but not many governments will put 240 million, $250 million on the table to actually to stand behind it. And again, this is not 240 million over 10 years. This is 240 million that we're going to get out the door in the next 3 to 4 years. We are determined, absolutely determined, to take a leadership role in this, not just for Australia, because we've got to do it not just for New South Wales, because we support then Australia in terms of general cyber, but this part of the world, we will definitely take that lead.
What is your view? I'm reading this question. What is your view of the opportunity for improving digital maturity at the local council level? Is that something that the Digital Restart Fund will be supporting?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm starting to put the bones together now in relation to that fund. Like the smart places strategies and the policy document's critical because it gives you the vision, but the fund will be pivotal because it will give you the money. Put the petrol in the tank, as it were, and some big announcements about that next month around that time in relation to what this fund will actually look like and the structure of it. But definitely we have to work with councils to build up their maturity. And that's why I'm really passionate about e-planning, because e-planning is a quantum leap for councils, because all of a sudden, rather than them having their own systems at various levels of maturity, they've now just all jumped on board in terms of e-planning, which is world leading in terms of its digital piece. And again, it's all open, so we can all see what's happening, and not just government, but the public as well. So it's a far, far better experience. And the same with cyber. Cyber is, it's always, you'll look at the weakest link. If councils that are at a different level of maturity, and some councils could be less than others, then that's a weak point. So part of the smart places strategies and the cyber strategies definitely to work far more closely with councils to help lift them up as well. Yeah, they're a critical part of our governance ecosystem here in New South Wales, and the closer we work with them, the stronger and the better the outcomes for the people of our great state.
Okay, some follow-ups on contact tracing. I know I downloaded the Digital New South Wales, or the Service New South Wales digital app when I went into a restaurant. I think lots of people are doing that. A couple of questions. One, what percent of adoption do you need to get to consider it a success? Two, does it impact government's thinking about group size in terms of starting to open up to larger venues, like in business meetings or in restaurants? Does better contact tracing lead to an accelerated reopening of larger gatherings?
Oh, definitely. Well, for starters, Gabrielle, we doing the check-in feature for venues in Dubbos. It's for restaurants and pubs owned by them, and every service centre in New South Wales, there's 110 of those. So we're just doing that pilot now. Hopefully, it's not going to be a long pilot because of the urgency of the situation. But once that opens up, then we can roll it out across the state. So in terms of adoption, we got digital driver's license. That's about 30. We just ticked over the 30%, so about 1.6 million people have now got a digital driver's license. That will be an aspirational target, but potentially it could be a lot more, particularly in the COVID setting. To answer the last part of your question, definitely. Like, the more information that we have, the more fine-tuned our response can be. We don't want to shut down the economy, because we can see what's happened to Victoria. Like, it brings you to tears to think what is going to happen to a whole lot of people in Victoria whose businesses, whose jobs are just going to evaporate because it's the second lockdown. Like, it's just so heartbreaking. So we can't do that. It's literally our break glass option. So the reason that we've managed to walk and chew gum at the same time here in New South Wales is because we've been very data driven in our response. So, for example, in relation to pubs and clubs, we're saying this is a high risk venue. You must check in and you must provide digital records within 24 hours. And now with the app that we're rolling out, it will be instantaneous, and it all goes pretty much through to service/health with privacy around it. So, we're hoping for a good adoption rates, but the more information we can get around there, again, subject to privacy and security, the more we'll be able to open up the economy in a safe way, because it means that we'll be able to pull out the weeds rather than round up the whole lawn. And it's a metaphor I've used time and time again, because I was a minister for regulation. And, when governments are dumb, or when governments can't see much, what they do is, I heard this expression the other day, it's like playing whack-a-mole with a blindfold. They hit everything. Whereas we shouldn't be doing that. We should be just very targeted in our response, so we can get people to get on with their lives and just deal with the issues. But you can only deal with the issues when you can see them. So data is a critical place to that, subject to privacy and security.
All right, well, on the subject of avoiding a Melbourne-style lockdown, I was looking for my opportunity to ask you this. I want to ask you about masks. You may have seen that the committee has called for mandatory mask wearing in certain indoor environments, because the science seems to say there's something about getting above 80% compliance, which in no society will happen through voluntary exhortation. And the theory is that cutting community transmission from asymptomatic carriers could allow New South Wales to stay open. So we've been really pushing that idea. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've got my personal views on masks, but at the end of the day, I'm part of a government, part of a team, and I'm not the health expert. So there are plenty of experts, and I have these discussions all the time with Kerry Chan. Trust me, the amount of discussions I have with Kerry Chan. But she's the expert, so I fall into line. And look, to health's credit here in New South Wales, they've done an outstanding job in keeping us safe. So it's not for me to second guess them or to be the armchair critic. So at this stage, health has said masks are strongly recommended in enclosed venues and trains and places that you suggested. So we haven't gone down the path of mandating them yet. It's not to say we won't, but we'll be guided by health advice, because that advice has given us a good direction thus far. My view is, more generally, like, when it comes to mask wearing, it's like, again, building up that compliance muscle. Like, we never were exposed to SARS or MERS, but in Southeast Asian countries they were. And so when you look at places like Taiwan and Korea, South Korea, putting on a mask for them is like for us putting on a scarf in winter. As soon as they see infection rates go up, the government doesn't have to tell them they've got to put it on. They just put on the mask, because they know how to respond to a pandemic because they've been through, or an epidemic because they've been through one before. In New South Wales and in Australia, we haven't done that. This is all new territory for us. And we've seen down in Victoria that you can mandate masks, but there will still be a cohort, not insignificant cohort of people that will protest and say, I'm not going to wear masks, that you're impinging on my civil liberties. So it's one of those things where we have to take the people with us on this journey. And it's New South Wales, with a population of 8 million people, we're not some small little patrol boat that can move really quickly. When you're trying to steer 8 million people, it's like moving an aircraft carrier. You've got to move incrementally and bring people on the journey, because if you move an aircraft carrier too quickly like that, there's going to be a whole lot of people that fall off or abandon ship and say, stuff you. And it only takes a small amount of people to say, I'm protesting because you're unfairly disrupting my liberty, to ruin it for everyone. So, health's advice so far is strongly recommend. If the numbers stay low, great. If the numbers escalate, well then, that might, that setting may need to escalate to more of a mandatory setting. But, I've got my own views, but at the end of the day, I trust health. They've done a great job, and I'm not going to start doubting them now.
All right. Several people asking a variant of how do you address digitally disadvantaged people in this world we're moving to?
That's such a good question. It's obviously, it's something that occupies my mind a lot. Like in the pre-COVID setting, think about this. I'll take one step back. I'll never forget, I went to India about 5-6 years ago, and I went to the Dharavi slums. I'll never forget it. And this is 5-6 years ago, it wasn't last year. And at the time, when I was going through the slums, the thing that stood out for me probably the most was the amount of people that had smartphones, mobile phones. This is some of the poorest of the poor in the world, and they still had smartphones. And because they had smartphones, they were able to open up the world, basically, whether it's education, health, all these outcomes that ordinarily they would not be privy to. So technology is the greatest enabler that we have, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. I'm not here to get richer people richer. I'm here to try and reduce suffering as much as I can, and technology is the best platform to do that. So before COVID, there was a big body in the community that would say, oh, look, there's a whole lot of old people out there that just can't adapt to digital, and they never will. Well, guess what happened? COVID came along, and they're using digital, FaceTiming, Zooming, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we busted a lot of myths around the ability to transition into a digital world. And there's a whole lot of people saying, oh, yeah, but there's the older people, they're not digital, or there's the poor, they're not digital. I want to challenge that. I think they are. And it's the older people that need to be digital probably more than anybody else. Like, I did a post recently on social media where I saw this elderly lady. She was in her 70s, and she had a button in her arm, and because she's got diabetes. And this button now measures her glucose level, and she then reads it off her smartphone. And rather than pricking herself all the time, she got busy to check her levels. So she's now checking her basically glucose levels on her phone. And this 70-year-old plus lady said to me, it changed her life. Like, she kept saying, it has changed my life, Victor. It has changed. She said it 3 times, like the cock crowing 3 times. It's changed my life. It changed my life. And this is a 70-year-old plus lady. So I think we need to use digital to empower the poor, to empower the aged, not use it as an excuse not to. So we need to bring them on the digital journey as much as anybody else. And I'll give you one other example. I'm passionate about homelessness. So working with the Act to End Street Homelessness, and big shout out to Microsoft because they helped partner with this. Again, in the old way, what we would do is go about with pen and paper and go, oh, who are you? Right? Why are you homeless? Yeah, domestic violence, unemployment, drugs, a whole lot. I'll get you a place for the night. Two nights later, another person from government or another good organisation, NGO, will go out to the same person. Who are you? You know, how'd you get here? Okay, I'll find you another place. It's horrendous because we're treating these people literally like numbers rather than humans. If we actually digitize this process, I'd say, hey, Fred, you don't have to tell me your story. You've already told me, i.e. government and organisations, your story 100 times. Let me get you to this home quickly and with the medication you need quickly. That's humanising. That's true service delivery. And digital is the way through it. And what we're doing here in New South Wales in terms of homelessness around through digitisation of that problem is, again, world leading. So to answer your question, digital must be part of the solution, whether it's for those that are not engaged. And if we do that, then we'll drive far better outcomes for them.
Right. So to paraphrase, understanding a digital divide is not a reason not to move forward with digital. It's a reason to overcome the divide and put a lot of energy and funding and into including people in these new tools.
You paraphrased it far better than I ever could, Gabriel.
Interesting. Some people asking about Estonia as an example, which I wouldn't normally throw at a minister, but I'm suspecting you know about Estonia. Has it, maybe you probably know more than I do. Can you say a minute about what Estonia has done, and has that been an influence on your thinking at all?
Yeah, it has. So I've been to Estonia, and I went there about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was pretty impressed at what they've got. So, you know, every country is doing their own bit. So Estonia's got some amazing things. They've got the Crossroad network. I'll quickly walk you through. And but I went to Denmark, and they've got the e-box, which again, I thought this is something that we could pick up and adopt here in New South Wales, and we're starting to architect that out as we speak. But Estonia, basically, the best thing about Estonia is they say to the citizen, look, if you tell us that you've changed address, then you've told us once. If another government agency asks you, oh, what's your address? They'll get fined because they need to go to the source of truth where the citizen has actually said, I've changed address, I'm not telling you anymore. You come to this place to find out all the information you need. And it's the citizen that owns all the information. It's not the government information. I like the way they think about data. It's the citizen's data. It's not government's data on the citizen, it's the citizen's data. And that's a great mindset, I think, particularly as we move forward. So that was a really important play there in terms of what they've done in Estonia to help them on their digital transformation journey. And they're doing some great work. But, you know, they're a smaller country. I think it's a population of 1.7 million, so they can move really fast. Culturally, they had to move very fast because they got, you know, Russia as a neighbor, and you know, and the threats there. So they virtually had to go up into the cloud to protect them on a number of for a number of reasons. But there's some great things we're picking up from them, and some other places around the world. Singapore, Denmark. Saw something interesting in Israel the other day that I thought, you know, I'd like to pick this up and try and use that here in New South Wales.
Minister, a follow-up question about the Smart Places strategy. Why are you focusing it in specific precincts or specific parts of Sydney rather than rolling some of the things out everywhere? Doesn't that reduce your economies of scale?
Well, no, it is, to my knowledge, the first Smart Places. It's a regional strategy. So it's, as I said, it's not Smart Cities strategy. It's regional. It's to apply to all of New South Wales. How we will operationalise that is going to be, you'll see the bones of it in the digital or the Smart Places fund that we're starting to build out. I can't give too much away now, but the Smart Places Fund will involve a lot of collaboration. There's over 140 odd councils plus all the other organisations that would want to be involved in this journey. It could be your committee, it could be other organisations that say, hey, we've got something interesting. We don't want to do it, sequentially. We don't want to say, all right, you first, then you, then you. They'll take forever. We do need to let as many flowers bloom as possible, and then where they work, replicate that across New South Wales for the benefit of us all. But the design thinking around that, I'm starting to work through in the Smart Places Fund. And again, I'll have a lot more to say about that, because that's really going to be the engine of how we implement this policy. And it's going to be very exciting, very, very exciting. Like, I've already given you a taster in relation to Newcastle. Again, that's got to go through its process, so I can't say that's going to be ticked off, but it's a good idea. There's another council that spoke to me about the use of AI. Again, it's not about sensors on a pole or a road. It's how they want to use AI to get better planning outcomes. I thought, wow, that's smart. That's the type of stuff we need. So anyway, I'm really excited by this. But we'll have a lot more to say about it in the weeks ahead.
Okay. A question about the government workforce. Every organization is going through a rethink right now about workplace culture. Working from home for, I think, most organizations has gone better than expected. If I can make a big overgeneralization. How is government thinking about changes to its workplace culture and its mix of where people work and how they work as we move forward into the post-COVID world?
Yeah, that is a massive question. I look around me in the city of Sydney, and you speak to lawyers and accountants, and they're saying that they're actually getting more productivity from people working at home. So, we're probably going to see a structural shift from, C-grade office spaces. They don't need to be there anymore because the rents are coming down, so they'll move into the Bs, and the Bs will go to the As. That means all the Cs, there's an opportunity to repurpose those. There is a massive shift that is happening right underneath our feet, and that's going to play out over the next 2 or 3 years, I imagine. So, how does that work from home? Well, I've already touched on the cyber issue. I think there's going to have to be a lot more, muscle work in relation to making sure that your work environment at home is equally friendly. I.e., if you're working in an office environment, there's a lot more cues around you to make sure that you're okay mentally, for example. You've got your colleagues next door. We can see you burning the midnight oil. You can see you're depressed. You can see you're upset. There's a lot more support in a social context. If you're tucked away at home, and particularly if you live by yourself, or if you don't have that close relationship, then you could seriously be isolated. So these are some of the other things around mentally healthy workplace that we need to look at in addition to cyber. So how do we make sure that your home workplace is equally a safe workplace? So these are some of the big things that we need to start working through right now, not in 5 years' time, right now, to make sure that we do have a strong workforce for the future.
Minister, a follow-up about privacy. I know you talk to the public a lot through all kinds of ways. You do surveys and understand attitudes. Is the public concerned about privacy, and does that affect the uptake of some of these things or not? Not so much.
That's such a good question, Gabrielle. No, look, I think they are concerned, but it's almost like at I don't want to say superficial level. They are concerned about privacy because it is so intrinsic to our way of life, our freedoms. Like, we don't want to be in North Korea or a country where it's where there's mind control. Like, we don't want to be there, and there is a real possibility of some countries going down that path. So privacy to me is so crucial to defend, because it is just intrinsic to our way of life. But then when you look at why I say to is because, we talk about it, but then, you download an app or you go onto your page and you pretty much abandon all levels of privacy when you're going to some of these big tech giants, because they know more about you than anybody else. People say, oh, the government knows so much about me. Well, actually, we don't. MasterCard, the banks, the telcos, the Googles, they know way more about you than government ever will. So we do need to have a more mature and a deeper discussion around privacy. I think that is arguably one of the biggest discussions that we have to have in a post-COVID world, because as we rapidly transition to digital, and we haven't even talked about AI yet, really, and quantum, once that convergence takes place of quantum and AI in the later part of this decade, privacy has to be right at the front of that conversation, right at the front. And even the stuff we're doing now, privacy in relation to QR checking codes. Now, in South Korea, they're prepared to forgive some of their privacy in order for the general public health, but knowing full well that once this pandemic passes, the privacy settings, the traditional privacy settings come back into play. These are the type of discussions we need to have. We need to scale up and scale down various settings to adjust to the circumstances of the day. We're not having these deep discussions, but we need to.
Yeah, we're in the early days of figuring this out, aren't we? And
yeah, we are.
We're still lacking in even the principles, the theory about how privacy should be structured.
Absolutely, and we haven't even talked about e-health yet and telehealth. Like, when we're starting to measure not just what's on the outside of your skin, but what's on the inside.
Yeah.
So it's like, really, we need some serious thought leaders to start channeling a path, because that will help accelerate our digital journey. Because once you bed down privacy, once you bed down security, once you bed down transparency, and you wrap it around with ethics, then you got trust. And once you got trust, you can build anything you like. Yeah. And Estonia's proven that.
Yeah, that's right. In order to really push the frontiers of this, that license from the public based on trust is what unlocks everything.
Absolutely.
That's actually an interesting segue to a question about e-health. I mean, look, that's largely federally managed, but what is the New South Wales government's role in enabling that transition?
We've got the largest public health system here in New South Wales in the Southern Hemisphere, to my knowledge. Like, it's huge. And there is so much we can do to digitalize health. Like, I was there the other day and I couldn't believe that they are still using fax machines to get information from one source to another. I was speaking to a professor the other day in what was her specialty. I think she was a skin specialist, and she was saying to me that for her to get information from a patient in Liverpool Hospital, she needs to fax stuff across, and she can't press a button. Let's say the patient's with me, I've got your consent, so you do all the consents and the privacies and all that stuff. Once I've got that, I should be able to press a button, and all the information on this patient that was previously in Liverpool Hospital should appear on my screen. So we get rid of a whole lot of inefficiency. She can't do it. Got to literally go by fax. It is a joke, an absolute joke. So I have, using part of the 1.6 billion fund, I will be working very closely, very, very closely with the Minister for Health to digitise health as much as we can, because it occupies a third of the budget. That's only going to go north. And the more we can provide specialised and acute care wrapped around the individual's needs, ideally at home, with monitoring at home, rather than going into an infected hospital where there's a lot of infections. this is where we need to move. You're not going to get there unless we go digital. So I'm very, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this,
Yeah.
very determined to get it done.
And that's such a big portion of GDP that's being spent on healthcare. So any
Absolutely.
efficiencies you can squeeze out of that is enormously significant. Yeah. What role will New South Wales Telco Authority play in a digital state? And is that part of your plans or not? I will confess, I don't even know what it is, but I'm asking the question.
So we got the critical communications program that we're rolling out now, and basically, in the bad old days, what would happen is police would have their own dedicated government radio network. Makes sense. Police, they need to be able to talk to each other. Ambulance would have their own. Firefighters would have their own, et cetera, et cetera. All the emergency service would have their own. What we've done is it's the biggest investment, to my knowledge, in the country's history in terms of critical communications. And we're putting, I think it's close to $600 million on it. And basically, we're making sure that they come into a combined network so they can start talking to each other. So in the case of a fire, a bushfire, and there's emergency response, police can talk on the same network to ambulance and to firefighters, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a critical play in terms of our emergency response. And, as Dorothy McKellar says, whether it's fires or floods, we are a country increasingly of natural disasters and natural challenges. So to have this critical communications infrastructure in place is so important to our future in looking after the people of our great state. So, yeah, in many ways, that journey started about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's well evolved. I think we're going to have 98% saturational coverage within the next 4 or so years. So, yeah, that's a very important piece of our emergency.
All right, Minister, we are at the end of the hour. I want to thank you for taking time. You obviously have a very full plate. That was a fascinating overview of so many things happening, and I know we barely scratched the surface. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, everyone. And thank you for those that stayed on the journey.
Everyone, thank you for joining, and we'll see you at the next Committee for Sydney Live.
Cheers.